where the Europeans stand and what the European crisis or what the response from Europe was to the crisis. That's our next topic, and we are hearing from nobody less than Jean-Claude Juncker, the former president of the European Commission and former Prime Minister of Luxembourg. Mr. Juncker, the virtual floor at least is yours. Good morning to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Unfortunately, I'm not a professor, but I'm a modest politician, so having to intervene after Professor Stiglitz, it must lead immediately to a major disappointment when you are listening to me. The fact is that we are living in the middle of a real poly-crisis, a serious health crisis, a deep economic crisis, a geopolitical crisis, given the fact that the crisis was impacting us at the very same moment everywhere, globally spoken. It was symmetric, but it led to asymmetric consequences, which entails a geopolitical problem setting. And this crisis is a social crisis in perspective, and thus more globally a political crisis. When it comes to Europe, one has to admit that the first response of the European Union, of the Commission, of other institutions was rather weak. The political European response was characterized by the fact that we were starting very slowly. Why was this so? Because normally Europeans are ready to act and ready to lecture other people without having the needed acts on their side. But here we were, the institutions, including the Commission, they were very silent. Why was this so? This was so because the European Union, and thus the Commission, doesn't have any kind of proper competencies in the public health sector, because governments till now, it has changed, it must change, but considering that public health policy is of the domain of domestic issues and that the European Union should not interfere in the way member states, governments, national parliaments are organizing their health sector. This crisis revealed that this was a major mistake. I remember that back in the beginning of the 20s, in 2003, 2004, when we were discussing the so-called European constitution, some governments, including my small Luxembourgish government, were proposing to broaden the competence of the European Union in the health sector, but this was rejected by a majority of member states, mainly those who today are requesting with fiercely requesting the extension of the competencies in the health, in the public health sector. So, as the European Union doesn't have real public health competencies, it was quite normal that the governments, all of them, were referring to what they know best. That means their national framework, which leads to export restrictions, which led to the closing of borders and to other unsound behaviors, and as a consequence of that, to a real attack on what people thought be eternal. That means a proper functioning of the internal market, the fluidity of economic flows, trade flows between member states. So it was a major wound which was brought to the collective European body. This lack of coordination was a problem and could be a problem if we are not learning the lessons from the first crisis wave. And then the crisis was leading and is leading to serious economic consequences. We have witnessed an economic slowdown, quite a major amount, unexpectedly, because the growth situation in Europe since the end of the financial and economic crisis was picking up, we had to face, given this severe economic slowdown, a major increase in unemployment, and taken together, the rise in unemployment, the collapse of our economy, had to be added to the already existing uncertainties on the global scale. The conflicts surrounding the European Union, because we have wars at the periphery of the European Union. We were in the middle of the White House campaign when the crisis was hitting us. We have to have in mind the uncertainties linked to the different trade wars or trade conflicts we are observing around the globe. So this uncertainty was predominantly a factor which explained the slowdown and all the micro and macroeconomic problems we were facing. And then China was reappearing on the global economic scenery, because China is the only part of the world, of the global economy, which is picking up, because China will have a growth this year, next year, around about 2 or 2.5%, whereas the growth in Europe is negative, and the recovery foreseen for next year and forecasted for next year is not of a volume that it could replace the losses we have suffered in the course of the crisis we are describing. And the Chinese recovery, the Chinese the Chinese economy is showing, is not due to private consumption, but is due to public consumption, to state aid supported companies in the Popular Republic of China. So it will have, of course, a positive influence on the general scene, but it's not the recovery by its content, by its explanation, that we would like. And then another point which has to be mentioned, it concerns the fiscal and budgetary problems this crisis is entailing. During the 5 years of my mandate in Brussels, we brought the public deficit, the yearly public deficit, budget deficit, down from 6.2 to 0.7%. Even the public debt was decreasing, not to the same extent, but nevertheless improving its performance by 5 or 6%. From one day to another, the deficit problem was occurring, and we had to take into attention the public debt, which was pointing at the horizon, and which is has been realized since then. Fortunately, the Commission used one of the provisions of the Growth and Stability Pact, putting between brackets the Maastricht criteria. They are no longer applied nor sanctioned, because the Commission very wisely used this general exemption clause, which makes part of the Growth and Stability Pact, which, by the way, shows that the pact was not as stupid as people were saying, because crisis events like these have been integrated in the medium-term application of the pact. Now, we have to make sure that we will not repeat the mistakes we have experienced during the first economic and financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, until the Greek problem helping us to have to deal with the public debt crisis until the year 2015. We should not forget that this debt, the one the European Union is contracting now, has to be repaid. And I would like us to not to delay in an excessive way the reimbursement of the public debt, because public debt seems to be harmless, but it is very dangerous if you are not keeping it under control. And it's easier to have an increase of the public debt level than to convince citizens that we have, as soon as possible, to pay back the debt we are contracting. The European Union has developed a recovery plan, which was an intelligent and wise thing to do. This pandemic recovery plan amounts to a level of 750 billion. This money has to be spent in a future-oriented way. It's not money like that. It's not helicopter money. It's not beer for free. It has to be dedicated to future-oriented investments. It has to be dedicated to structural reforms. It has to be dedicated to the digital agenda the Commission was putting forward. It has to be dedicated to research and to development and to the development of the public health sector in Europe and to the sector which is a very important domain of research. So my concern for the time being is that this money will be distributed in a proper way, mainly the grants, because this package is financed by two sources, grants and loans. I would prefer that these grants will be severely monitored by the European Union and will be launched only in the case the national reform programs are proving that they are pointing in the right direction. Unfortunately, we are lagging behind because the budget for 21 to 27 and the 750 billion recovery plan, they have suffered an important delay. The budget should have been adopted in July this year in order to allow to the Commission to develop the programs starting in January 2021. This will no longer be possible. And the recovery plan and the budget, they are linked to the respect of the rule of law. You know that we have a problem with both Hungary and Poland. The European Parliament and the Council of Ministers put themselves on agreement on several lines concerning the rule of law linkage. This is discussed highly controversially for the time being, and I hope that the Commission and the German presidency will be able to have the European Union being put in a situation that the decision will be possible before the end of this year. I had Mrs. Merkel on the phone yesterday, and I know that she's working hard in that direction, but it's not easy. We have remaining problems because the Growth and Stability Pact has to be taken under exam. During my term in Brussels, I was launching a reform process of the Growth and Stability Pact because the Growth and Stability Pact has to be simplified. Nobody is really understanding what are all the elements included in the Growth and Stability Pact, which is leading to a chaotic application of this pact, and so simplification is urgently needed. And I know that the commissioners in charge are sitting around all kinds of tables in order to prepare this reform of the Stability Pact. The remaining problems we are facing are the same. The climate crisis is not over. If the pandemic is over, the climate crisis will be there. Fortunately, we have the perspective that the US administration, the new one, will rejoin the Paris Agreement, which is good news, but being part of the agreement is not replacing concrete political action. And so we have to reinforce our efforts when it comes to the climate change package. And there too, the Commission has made proposals which are pointing in the right direction. The trade problem is still there. We had this trade conflict with the US. I was able to resolve this problem in long negotiations with President Trump. Now we are swimming into another direction because Biden, my good friend, he will give more importance to the multilateral approach of trade policies and other domains of international undertakings. But we have to convince the public opinions in Europe that trade policy is of the essence. 44 million jobs are directly and indirectly depending on foreign trade. We have concluded 15 trade arrangements in the last 5 years, including the Mercosur trade agreement we have signed in December 2019 in the margins of the G20 in Buenos Aires. And this Mercosur trade agreement, which is a very important one because it's concerning a big number of people, of nations, and of factories and of jobs, is under strong attack in the European Union, because in the European Union, the public opinions don't like these trade arrangements, whereas they are of vital importance for the well-being of the Europeans. And then we have to invest more time and more money in the digital process in Europe. There too, we are lagging behind as Europeans, and we have to speed up our efforts as far as the digitalization is concerned. The Commission will put forward its final proposal by mid-December. 20% of the financial means of the recovery plan are dedicated to the digital agenda, and this is of the essence. And finally, my general impression is that although I'm not a naive European, that this crisis is bringing Europeans closer together, because we have experienced at the beginning of the crisis and during the first 2 months of the crisis that we are heading nowhere if we are not trying to act in common. Each and every European nation is too small to deal in a standalone approach with the pandemic crisis, and with other crises. And people have seen, ordinary people in the noble sense of the word, they have seen that if governments are acting together, if the Commission is ordering a vaccine in the way that each and every country of the European Union and each and every citizen of the European Union can use this vaccine, and that the vaccine, the number of vaccines we are receiving in the European Union has to be distributed in an equal way, including to those of the global society resembling less rich countries than those being member states of the European Union. If people are seeing that acting in common makes sense, leads us to better answers, and makes us better Europeans, because we can become better Europeans, because this is also a lesson of solidarity affecting all the domains of public and to a large extent private life, then we will have learned the right lessons from what is happening now. And we have to avoid this lack of coordination, which is still there because each and every country and each and every government is announcing national measures when it comes to the locking down or to the end of the locking down. President Macron was giving his views yesterday night during a speech to the nation. The German Chancellor is sitting together with the prime ministers of the 16 German Länder in order to formulate some policy, public health policy answers. And so we have to avoid this lack of coordination. But anyway, I'm not optimistic. That would be stupid. I'm confident that the Europeans will find their way out of this crisis by sticking together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Juncker. Let me ask you a question, though, because you're obviously and clearly an expert on how negotiations are happening in Brussels. So how confident are you that there will be a budget agreed by December and also that the rescue money will be freed, i.e. will there be a compromise or will they reign in the Eastern European nations? What's your view?
No, I think that there will be compromise because there must be a compromise. It's a matter of common sense. And if it's not there for the 1st of January, it will be there for the 1st of March because we can live 1, 2 or 2 months and a half without a full-fledged budget in the European Union. But this recovery plan is of the essence because what people don't believe is and don't see is that if this European Union, counting amongst the member states 19 members sharing the same currency, is unable to react collectively to a crisis like the one we are experiencing, the monetary union itself is losing credibility. And it would be intelligent to go on, crisis or not crisis, with the work on the deepening of the economic and monetary union. We have to complete the banking union. We have to complete the capital markets union. We have to put into place a common deposit guarantee scheme. These are essentials when it comes to the European future. We have to prove that we are there, and we have to prove that it's good for Europe and for the world that the European Union is there.
While we're talking a lot about the crisis and the measures which we are deploying to fight the crisis, Brexit is also happening. I know you have been very much involved in the negotiations which have been ongoing for so many years. But what's your scenario now for Brexit, and how concerned are you also about what it means for Europe?
I had so many Brexit scenarios in recent years that and they never happened. So I'm very cautious when it comes to developing Brexit scenarios. But we are reaching the final phase of the end game. And I really hope that those who are in charge of the negotiations will deliver all the efforts they can deliver in order to bring this, in my view, tragedy to a good end. I do think that a no deal answer would be a better answer for generations. And the higher cost for Britain than for the European Union, but nevertheless, the European Union will have to pay the price for a no deal. The negotiations are pursued, although members of the European part of the two delegations are suffering from some COVID-19 events, which leads to the fact that these negotiations cannot take place in a physical way, which is a bad thing. I think that we'll have a breakthrough in the next 2 weeks. If not, this is not a catastrophe, then we have to continue. But anyway, the European Union, at least as long as I was there, and I think that this is still the case, we are not in a spirit of revenge. The British people made its decision. I do think that this is a wrong decision. It's not a decision taking the avenue of history and of the future, but we have to respect that decision. But we have to insist on several elements: a level playing field when it comes to the access to the internal market, a proper understanding of the state aid policy put into place by Britain, and an access for the European fishermen to the British waters. You know, the first treaty between Britain and Europe concerning fishery was concluded in 1660 with the Belgians. So were they more intelligent? We are now. So we should concentrate on the definition of a solution. And I think that future generations will hold us responsible for the failure, if failure there will be.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your insight, Mr. Juncker, and especially in those times, stay safe.
Yeah. Okay, stay safe. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.